Hi, and welcome to this fun presentation about Russia. This is my second time that I've been there, and I met my friend as usual, and this is the story that I'm gonna share with you. This is a film that my friend and I put together. People often have a sort of misconception about Russia, although whenever I talk about it after my traveling, they never seem to be surprised. And they always say, well,
Putin is the sole ruler of Russia, just like Lucifer in hell. And it's a police state, and everybody who disagrees goes to the gulag. Or if you're a little bit different, then you automatically go to the gulag. And that is quite a misconception, especially if you go there and you realize things are not that bad. Of course, when I come back alive in one piece and tell my story to people, everyone goes, well, yeah, that's what we expected. I didn't think that you would die. But then again, these people did tell me that be careful because you might die. And of course, Russia is the kind of country, it seems, that creates these kind of paradoxes.
so what's this episode all about? Well, I met my friend, Natalia, we ate food, I hired a car to drive to Nizhny Novgorod from Moscow. It's a random city that nobody really heard about, and I thought it would be a nice idea to see a typical Russian city that's not Moscow or St. Petersburg. And then we ate more food, and our cows met, because we both like cows. And then there is a thing called Cafe Mumu. I'm not gonna tell you more about it, but in time. It all started with driving to the end of the world, because I live in Milton Keynes. And I have a car, which is great, and I drove to Gatwick, because that's where the travel agent booked my ticket from. At that point I didn't really think about it, but then, come think of it, Gatwick is probably the furthest airport I could have ever chosen or agreed to when the travel agent told me about all the available flights. Let's talk about the airports of London, because airports are fun. So as you can imagine, London is a big city and it has a couple of airports. Now when I commute back to Hungary from time to time, I use Luton, because that's closer to me. Remember, I live up north a bit. Unfortunately, Gatwick is probably the worst choice, as you can see. So, well, a journey there through London, even though there is a big round motorway, it's just exhausting. And then there is the waiting at the airport, being exhausted, but at least I didn't have problem finding my flight, because Gatwick is full of EasyJet planes that have the orange logo, but mine was the only blue one. So I got to experience all sorts of traveling, and I got to be tired on all sorts of transportation. And then it went on. Sheremetyevo, one of the airports of Moscow, is outside the city, much like in London, and the hotel is, well, my hotel was inside the city, but as you can see, it was a bit north from the city center, but unfortunately the Air Express goes to Belaruskaya station, which is near the center. I tried to get an Uber, but unfortunately every single driver declined because there was some sort of congestion on the motorway leading to the airport, and even at the airport I saw that no cars were moving. People got into a taxi and they just couldn't get out.
There are a lot of churches in Russia, and it is quite easy to spot them simply because they are so distinctive. They are very different from the other architectural features.
And there are churches in Hungary as well. Catholic churches, because that's the popular thing in Hungary, they are less obvious because they are less fancy looking. And by fancy looking I don't necessarily mean rich, but nice. Here everything looks like a cathedral.
It's just easy to spot them when you turn around the corner. You turn around and there is that one. However, despite the huge number of churches, it wasn't always the case. The number fluctuated quite a bit in the 20th century.
Let me direct your attention to the graph. As you can see, in 1927 it went down to almost zero, and then it went up again, the number of churches, and then went down again, and now there is a sort of rehabilitation era. And look, the reason it happened because there were people in Russia thinking that, well, we don't need churches anymore. The problem is that they weren't demolished, but they do need refurbishing. So this going up and down didn't do good to the churches, although the situation is not too dire. But what I actually did was not looking at all the churches, but walking around the city, and that you do that using the streets. There are all sorts of crazy and fun buildings. It often reminds me of the US, except that the roads and squares are really, really wide. And that's because, especially recently, the government decided that you can't fight traffic jams. If you widen the streets, there will be more cars. There will always be traffic jams. So the thought behind this is you just don't care about cars anymore. You simply take back the streets on behalf of the people who wish to roam the streets. So everything looks pretty. I say that's a great idea. So there is a thing called Cafe Mumu. Because if you roam around the streets, you need coffee, you need food and whatnot. Since my friend and I love cows, it was obvious that which restaurant we would often go to. And it's basically a cow design restaurant. It's sort of like a self-service thing, like a canteen. And you go there and you take whatever food you want off of the counter or ask for it, and then in the end you pay. And they've been around for quite a while now, which is crazy. And of course, in addition to walking around, I guess it would be wise to use the metro, because Moscow has a pretty extensive underground system. And it's not just the system itself, but the stations are insanely beautiful. Everybody talks about the stations, so I only want to mention that there is one with some art that has cows. That's all I'm gonna say, because we all know how beautiful these Moscow metro stations are. So next thing is that because I love cows, but I also love space, after Cafe Mumu, it would be wise to go and visit some cows, but also some spaceships. So there is a farm in Moscow. The aim of the farm is mostly to show children how and what these animals are and what they usually do. So they have goats and sheep and rabbits and whatnot. And so my inner child wanted to see the cows because you can feed them. So that's what we did. They also have llamas for some reason. Now, my favorite thing, spaceships, besides cows, is that the Russians had their own space shuttle, which people usually know very little about. It's called the Buran, and it had one successful flight, and the fun fact about it, it has a fully automated guidance system from takeoff until landing. And it did just that. And according to the story, when it was coming back down, everybody was concerned about whether the space shuttle will make it or not, because, you know, it's one thing to design a system that's an entirely other thing to actually set it loose and have it run its thing. Just before the landing strip, it took a sharp left turn, and everybody was insanely concerned about it because they thought that it was going to crash. But as it turns out, what nobody realized, that the automated system detected that the landing speed was just too high, and it did a loop to slow itself down. And we are talking about 1988. Insanely brilliant. let's play a game. What possible reason could there be for me to visit Nizhny Novgorod? Is it A, because it has great architecture, brilliant buildings, it's something that it's world famous? Or famous museums, the best museums in the world, because they are just too brilliant and fantastic? Or C, it's the best place for tourists. Screw St. Petersburg and Moscow, everyone should go to Nizhny Novgorod. Or D, I've heard it being mentioned when I was a kid on a television show, a Hungarian TV show, and then because it was referenced so often, the name stuck with me, and then when I'm an adult and I can travel, I just want to get that out of my system. So we're stuck with D.
Nem én tettem oda, hogy akkor megtalálja.
Igen, megtaláltam, ez egy nagyon fontos levél. Valószínűleg egyelőre nem értem, mert oroszul van. Sejtem, hogy mi lehet benne. Igen, mit sejtem? Tudod, Károly, akkor, annak idején Nizhny Novgorodnál nagy harcok voltak. Nem kíméltek minket az oroszok, de minket se kellett félteni.
It's relatively easy to get from Moscow to Nizhny Novgorod. All you have to do is somehow, after ages, get out of the city, because driving is hell, basically. Not because of the drivers, it's just sheer amount of cars. It's insane. So you go on the M7 motorway and then you arrive at Nizhny Novgorod, probably 3-4 hours later. And that's fantastically easy. What surprised me about the motorways was that normally in Europe, in Hungary, in Austria, Germany, and all that, you go ahead and get on the motorway and get off a million hours later, but you don't have any intersections. Here, on the Russian motorway, at least on M7, you get to have intersections. It cuts through towns and villages, and also there is a crossing on it from time to time.
We all know that excessive speed is dangerous, and then checking it via speed cameras is a viable solution. Now, of course, it is exactly the same in Russia. They do have speed cameras. However, it is a little bit different than what we are used to. What they do is that they don't just use speed cameras, that would be too easy and too mundane. Russian creativity does not allow such a thing. Instead, they do something different. Yes, you saw that right. They do use cardboard cutouts of actual police cars. Well, isn't that fun? Well, it is. It fooled me at least twice. And then, at some point, I actually saw a proper police car with a speed camera, and they didn't look too different from the cardboard cutouts. So, you can never know for sure.
So every once in a while you have to slow down and just stop. And one of my stops was a park near the motorway, and it was fantastic. It's near to Vladimir. And what I noticed, but I didn't notice before, was that there are a lot of pine trees. It's amazing the amount of pine trees, and it really makes me realize that I'm up north. At least it feels north. I arrived to Nizhny Novgorod quite late, so I didn't do anything, except I went shopping and ate stuff. But the thing is, it was a great adventure, and I did lots of stuff. I ate Russian food, I saw Russian buildings, I saw Russian fortresses, and whatnot. It was quite brilliant.
What I usually do while traveling is buy random bits and pieces that I find. Obviously I bought food, just bread, and I bought some cake thingy. The guy is very happy on it, so I assume that it's quite tasty. Party stuff. Some cold cuts, they look like ham. Some tuna, because apparently they have a lot of these cans. This is one of the most interesting pieces. This is a thing, and it's cheese. That concludes my little experiment. If I survive all this, you get to see this video. If you're not seeing it, it means that I did not survive. Back to you, Chris.
First I went to see the Kremlin the next day. I didn't realize it before, but you can actually walk on the wall around, and this is quite the vantage point, and you get to photograph the city in its beauty. While I was walking, I did a little bit of research about Nizhny Novgorod, and what I found was a couple of interesting facts. First one is that it used to be named Gorky for a little bit, because Maxim Gorky was born in Nizhny Novgorod, and then during the socialist period it was renamed. But it wasn't just renamed, but it was closed to everyone. Not just foreigners, but Russians as well. And one fun fact I found is that one of the communist leaders of Hungary, or should I say socialist leaders, first secretary of the only party in a People's Republic of something, Mátyás Rákosi, died here. And most people think he died in Hungary, because that's what you usually do. And it's quite interesting that he ended up here. It's quite the big city, almost as big as Budapest. Now, it's easy to get out, it's easy to walk around. I would say that an average city with a population of 1 million people is big enough to feel like a city, so bits and pieces of Nizhny Novgorod, after this whole Kremlin experience, feels like a completely normal city. I mean, obviously I did not think that people would be starving here when I arrive, but it's nice to see that even though I went outside Moscow, people live proper lives and they are not dying in the streets. Then I went to get food. I was very, very hungry, and I did what I usually do when I'm very, very hungry, which is order a lot of food, not realizing what I'm getting myself into. So I thought, well, a tiny bit of soup and a tiny bit of main course with a little dessert would just serve me fine and would get me through the day. What happened actually was an insanely big amount of soup in that fantastic bread, and then a huge portion of meat with potatoes and a pretty decent side of dessert. I almost managed not to eat it because it's just too much. Then I drove out of the city, because like I said before, it's easy. Now at the other side I realized that there's a cable car going through the river, or separating Nizhny Novgorod from a place called Bor, which by the way means wine in Hungarian, but I'm sure that they didn't name it because they were thinking of Hungarian. So I was halfway through the second half of my trip when rain hit. Now this is, as I'm told, typical Russian weather. It's perfectly fine, and then some sort of Armageddon breaks out. And in this case it was rain, and I had to stop because it was just raining so much. And I wasn't the only one. So it wasn't because I was a foreigner. Most people had that normal idea that just stop because it was raining just way too much. It looked dangerous. At the end, I thought it would be a great idea to try out McDonald's in Russia. I've been to McDonald's in Europe, I've been to McDonald's even in Egypt, and in the US, in New York to be precise. Now, all of these countries, it's like 17 countries, everywhere McDonald's is the same, except in the US. And I'm sorry to say that, but it tastes horrible. And all my friends throughout the years told me not to go to McDonald's because it's unhealthy and it also tastes horrible. And I thought, well, not really. I mean, when I go to McDonald's in Hungary or Egypt or the UK or Germany, it tastes perfectly fine. So does in Russia. But for some reason, in the US, they treat customers in an awful way and just serve unhealthy, cheap, but also tasteless food. So, took a little walk around, tried to find some places that people live, aka houses, which is not very hard in a city because houses tend to be there. And I just went to a local shopping mall and looked around, and it seemed perfectly fine. So, I mean, obviously it's not the richest country in the world, or well, how would I know? But it looks perfectly normal, and I did not get murdered. But I find it kind of funny that lots of things just take advantage of this nostalgic feeling about the USSR. And then I was in Moscow again the very next day, and it was raining, as you can tell, because I'm wearing my blue raincoat. And I have to say again and again that squares in Moscow are absolutely beautiful, but also squares in other places are absolutely fantastic. And yeah, so the population of Moscow in the last 100 years just skyrocketed. It's insane. It went from under 2 million to over 10 million. You walk around and then you see Moscow, and then you walk around more and then you see more Moscow, and then you walk around even more and you think that, okay, now I must be outside of the city, and no, it's just more Moscow. My friend and I decided to get some Indian food because this is the place we always go to. Well, I mean, this is my second time, and normally in restaurant the food is brought to you and then you pay for it, which is fantastic. But not in an Indian restaurant. That's not enough. They really go the extra mile. So they bring in the food and then they help you distribute it, and from time to time they come in, ask if anything's alright, whether you need some stuff, and then they do things around you. They really make you feel like you're a king, and I'm just such an experience. I love it.
Hello, we could walk and you could tell me. What could you tell about Moscow?
I don't know. Christiana? She's just new.
Okay. Do you like Moscow?
Yes.
Why do you like Moscow?
Because Christiana told me to say that.
Okay. What did you expect when you come to Russia?
To meet Christiana.
Okay.
And I did. It's a cool trip.
Okay. What did you see in your trip?
Christiana,
What else?
Nizhny Novgorod.
Why did you go to Nizhny Novgorod? Because it is not so popular city in Russia.
Oh yes, but I've always wanted to go there. I have my reasons. I told Christiana, but she laughed.
Okay. Where now do you want to go now?
The Red Square. Or near the Red Square.
What do you know about the Red Square?
It's red. It's definitely a square. And that is the State Duma.
Yes.
Because Christiana told me.
What could you tell about Russian metro?
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay. So we could see a Russian metro here.
So the next day, I decided that I just should get sick. Well, actually, my body decided that I should get sick. And like all the sick people in the world, I needed to do something, get soup, get some fluid. So I went to Cafe Mumu because it's like a spiritual thing to me, but also they have soup and sushi and Russian food. And well, they have everything, like literally. And that's just absolutely brilliant. So I did what I usually do, which I should never do, but I always do. Looked at what I liked, and of course I liked everything, so I wanted to order all the things, but I ended up with a full plate of stuff that I could barely eat. So yeah, but it was absolutely delicious. It was fantastic, but it's the amount of food. It's crazy. So as I was sick, I didn't do a lot of running around, taking pictures and all that sort of craziness. Got up late, went to Cafe Mumu, enjoyed myself as best I could, then went on to meet my friend because we wanted to go to a Korean restaurant. The only problem was she had trouble remembering the name of the place. So we thought when we would get there, we wouldn't be able to find it. When we got to the proper coordinates, it turned out she did remember the name. Well, the name is the Korean restaurant. That was a very nice turnout of events. And then we ordered a lot of food. Because that morning I made the mistake of ordering a lot of food and then almost not being able to eat it, and a couple of hours later I thought, hey, why not make the same mistake again? Yes, well, that's me. I'd like to say that our cows were able to help us to get rid of the food, but you know that's not the case. So instead we chose to take whatever we couldn't eat away. I must say that in that restaurant the food was absolutely amazing. But then again, it's not McDonald's. After all the food and a little bit of walking around, that was the end of the day, for me at least, because one cannot do a lot of sightseeing when one is sick. Still, on our way back to one of the metro stations, I had the chance to look around Moscow at night. The next day, after 3 tries, 2 during my previous visit to Moscow, on the 3rd try, I was able to get into the armory. The armory houses lots of fancy clothing and gold and all sorts of treasures. And even though I do like treasure, it's not that incredibly amazing. It's decent, but what made it unforgettable was the 3 tries I had to make in order to get in. So in order to get into the armory, you have to get a ticket that lets you in, which is normal, but every hour there is a limited amount of people that they let in. So unless they are completely out of tickets for that day, there is a chance for you to get in. But we were there around 10 in the morning, but our ticket said we can only go in at 2. So then we decided to do a little bit of sightseeing. Lucky for us, Christiana accompanied our little team. There was a new park that they recently opened next to the Red Square, and in that park they built a little mountain that you can go up and look at Moscow. There's also a sort of sky bridge that takes you over the Moscow River, so you can see even more. On the other side of the Red Square, there is a fantastic park built on top of a shopping center, and the shopping center is on the ground. I find that quite effective. Then after getting into the armory, we decided to go on a short walk, which turned out to be a little bit longer than I had expected. And since I felt ill, it wasn't the best walk of my life, but I did get to see the Moscow State University, only from the outside, and I did get to see lots of normal Moscow people doing their business at night, around the parks and whatnot, which usually means food, bicycles, some car racing on a more or less official track near the university, and all sorts of nightly things. I made it home in one piece, not because of the danger I might have been in, but because of my health. I managed to pull myself together for my last trip to the airport. That proved to be a little bit more straightforward than it was getting to Moscow from London. Since we arrived quite early, we decided to have some food, some typical Russian food, before I take off. And it's not that we talked for too long. I gave plenty of time to stand in line for the check-in process, but somehow there was a hiccup in the system and the huge line just wasn't moving. So I thought, well, I do not want to not catch the plane, and I asked someone lurking around from the airport staff about how I could get in. And then he said they realized that there is a problem and they will call out the flight and put everyone forward who needs to check in time. I found that a reasonable handling of the situation, and that's what actually happened. I was able to get through check-in in time. Security, just like last time, did not take a very long time, and then I was off to the UK. Well, I guess that concludes my trip to Moscow for the second time in my life, also to Nizhny Novgorod and some surrounding towns and villages. I have to say that I'm fairly impressed by the way Russians handle life and the universe and everything. I do not wish to be the kind of person who unreasonably praises Russians. I can only talk about what I saw, and what I saw was fairly impressive. It's efficient, clean, does not look dangerous at all, at least not more than in any other country. So thanks for sticking with me throughout this extremely long video. And if you have any questions or experience you wish to talk about regarding Russia or Moscow, then you're welcome to join me in the comment section to discuss what's going on in there from the perspective of the outsider. So thanks for watching, and I'm signing off now. Bye bye.